8 subway stops, exactly 8. That's how far it takes to get from Independence Hall, the building where the Declaration of Independence was signed, to Allegheny Station in Philadelphia's Kensington neighborhood. 8 stops, 15 minutes by train, from the cradle of American democracy to the largest open-air drug market on the East Coast. You get off at the station and immediately realize you've entered a different country. The sidewalks are littered with trash and used syringes. Every few dozen meters, a person frozen in a half-bent position, as if someone paused mid-fall. Those who are conscious are so absorbed in the process of preparing and injecting a dose that they don't notice passers-by. They don't react to sounds. They don't look up. Silence. No one is talking. No one is asking for money. The air is heavy with hopelessness. This is Kensington Avenue, the main street of the American epidemic, and this street has become one of the most viewed places on YouTube. The 100 most popular videos about Kensington have garnered over 300 million views. Viewers come from Mexico, Germany, Indonesia, and Russia. 3,600 times a month, people around the world search for Kensington zombies. It's not a metaphor. This is what people look like under the influence of fentanyl and xylazine. Frozen in half-bent positions, with open wounds on their arms, their eyes rolled back in their heads, motionless on the sidewalks, like mannequins that someone placed along the street and forgot to remove. For international viewers, this is shocking content. For Kensington residents, it's a typical Tuesday morning. Kiara Lynn Garcia grew up in Kensington. She graduated from college. She moved 8,000 miles to Shenzhen, China, to teach English. She thought she had escaped. But in 2020, friends in China sent her a viral video. The camera moves under the blue shadow of the Kensington Avenue SkyTrain. Dozens of unconscious people line both sides. Some shoot up right in front of the camera. Others scratch their unhealed wounds. Still others lie on the pavement. Garcia recognized her street. She recognized the intersections she walked along to school. She later recalled, until 2014, she had never seen anyone shoot up right on the street. And then she did, on the way to school. And from then on, she took the subway. But let's start at the beginning, because Kensington wasn't always like this. And to understand how the area turned into a cemetery, you need to know what it was like when it was still inhabited. Kensington is one of the oldest neighborhoods in Philadelphia. In the 19th century and the first half of the 20th, it was an industrial district. Textile mills, foundries, workshops, warehouses, the working class, Irish, Polish, Italian, Puerto Rican families, red brick houses built tightly together with small yards and porches where neighbors would sit and talk in the evenings, schools, churches, stores, bars on every corner. The neighborhood lived, the neighborhood worked, and then the industry left. The factories closed one after another, starting in the 60s. Globalization, automation, manufacturing moved to Asia, to Mexico, to the southern states. The jobs disappeared, not gradually, but in a collapse. Over the course of 20 years, Kensington lost tens of thousands of jobs. Those who could left for the suburbs. Those who couldn't stayed and found themselves trapped. Buildings were abandoned, storefronts were boarded up with plywood, houses began to crumble because their owners could no longer afford repairs, and the city couldn't afford demolition. By the 1980s, Kensington had become what Americans call a food desert, an area where there was nowhere to buy decent food because all the grocery stores had closed. There was nowhere to get medical care because the clinics had gone with the money. There was nowhere to get a job because there were no jobs anymore. There was nowhere to get an education because the schools were overcrowded and underfunded. An entire neighborhood, 200,000 people, was cut off from the economy, from healthcare, from the future. Into this vacuum came drugs, and they occupied every square meter of the void left in the wake of industry. Heroin arrived in Kensington in the 1990s, but its roots run deeper. Back in the 1970s, the neighborhood was known as a hotspot for almost any drug. Crack in the 1980s, cocaine, methamphetamine. Each decade brought its own wave, but heroin took hold in the 1990s because the neighborhood's location was ideal for trafficking. Major highways nearby, I-95 runs just a few blocks. The Allegheny subway station, direct access from anywhere in the city. Abandoned buildings, dozens of warehouses for storing product, empty lots for meetings and deliveries. Dealers arrived first, buyers followed. From all over Philadelphia, from the suburbs, from neighboring states, Kensington became a magnet. The drug trade occupied empty buildings, empty streets, empty parks. McPherson Square Park, a public park with a library, was nicknamed Park of Needles. Street drug dealing was taking place in broad daylight. Police were present. Squad cars were parked on every block, but their intervention was selective. Locals say it was not uncommon to see a police officer checking a phone while someone injected themselves 10 meters away. It's not that the system didn't work, it did. It was designed to contain the problem within one neighborhood, not the solution. the container. As long as the drugs remained in Kensington, the rest of Philadelphia could pretend the problem didn't exist. And then the fentanyl arrived, and the container exploded. Fentanyl is a synthetic opioid. It was created in 1960 as a surgical anesthetic. In medicine, it is used in microscopic doses to numb patients during surgery and for terminal cancer treatments. On the street, it has become a weapon of mass destruction. Fentanyl is 80 to 100 times more potent than morphine. 2 to 3 milligrams, a few grains of salt on a fingertip, is a lethal dose for an adult. It is cheaper to produce than heroin because it is synthesized in a laboratory from chemical precursors, not grown in poppy fields. It is easier to transport because 1 kilogram of fentanyl is equivalent to 50 kilograms of heroin in terms of effect. And it kills significantly faster and more effectively because the window between enough and too much is measured in milligrams, not grams. By the mid-2000s, fentanyl began to displace heroin on the streets of Kensington. At first, it was mixed with heroin to enhance the effect. Then they stopped adding heroin altogether. Street buyers paid for heroin and received pure or nearly pure fentanyl. The difference between a high and death was measured in milligrams. The number of overdoses began to rise so rapidly that city statisticians couldn't keep up. In 2013, nearly 400 people died of drug overdoses in Philadelphia. By 2022, the figure was 1,413, a 3.5-fold increase in 9 years. 80% of deaths were related to opioids. 96% of opioid deaths involved fentanyl. That's more than from homicides, car accidents, and diabetes combined. Almost 4 people overdosed in the city every day, and most of them died on the streets of Kensington or its immediate surroundings. But fentanyl wasn't the last resort. Every time it seemed things couldn't get any worse, the streets proved otherwise. Dealers faced a commercial problem. Fentanyl is short-acting. Its effects last only a third as long as heroin. Customers come back for their fix too often. This creates queues, increases the risk of detection. It's inconvenient for business. A way to prolong the effect was needed. The solution was found not in pharmaceuticals, but in veterinary medicine. Xylazine is a tranquilizer for horses and cattle, a powerful sedative, not approved for human use, not intended for human use, never tested on humans in a clinical setting. It was mixed with fentanyl to prolong the drug's effects. On the street, this mixture became known as Tranq, from the word tranquilizer. The effect really does last longer. A person remains under the influence for hours instead of minutes, but the price paid for this is monstrous. Xylazine suppresses breathing. It causes profound sedation, so profound that a person doesn't respond to pain, cold, or movement. People fall asleep standing up and remain hunched over for hours, hence the word zombie, which has become synonymous with Kensington. But the worst part is the wounds. Xylazine causes severe skin ulcers, especially at injection sites. Open, deep, non-healing wounds that spread to the extremities, tissue death, necrosis, gangrene, amputations. And there's another detail that makes xylazine especially dangerous. Naloxone, a life-saving drug for opioid overdoses, is ineffective against xylazine. A fentanyl overdose can be reversed with a naloxone injection. A xylazine overdose cannot. And by 2021, 100% of the street heroin on the streets of Kensington contained xylazine. Every single dose, without exception. In 2024, something new appeared: medetomidine, another veterinary drug, an analgesic for animals, about 200 times more potent than xylazine. By March 2025, 83% of street drug samples in Kensington contained medetomidine. It had appeared a year earlier and had taken over the market within 12 months. At the same time, another substance never before found in drugs was discovered in street samples, a plastic stabilizer used in industrial production. 25% of samples. People are injecting substances intended for the production of plastic pipes into their veins. They don't know it. The dealers probably don't know it either. The supply chain is so chaotic and opaque that no one controls what exactly ends up in the final product. Meanwhile, the concentration of fentanyl itself in street doses is falling, from 9.6% by weight in May 2024 to 5.3% in March 2025. This means the doses are becoming weaker in terms of the active ingredient, but more dangerous in terms of impurities. A person injects themselves with a dose expecting a certain effect. They get a different one, an unpredictable one. And it's precisely this unpredictability that kills. The city tried to respond, many times, in different ways, with varying degrees of sincerity and effectiveness. In 2017, Mayor Jim Kenney's administration launched Project Resilience. More than $20 million from federal opioid crisis reparations paid to the states by pharmaceutical companies after lawsuits. The money went toward funding community organizations, expanding addiction treatment programs, dismantling homeless encampments, and street cleaning. Simultaneously, the boldest and most controversial attempt was undertaken, opening the first supervised drug consumption center in the United States, an idea already in use in Canada, Australia, and several European countries, but never implemented in the United States. The idea was simple: create a place where addicts could inject drugs under medical supervision, receive clean syringes, sterile wipes, and, if necessary, immediate resuscitation in the event of an overdose. The logic: if people can't be stopped from using, at least they can be kept from dying in the process. The Safe House Center received the mayor's support, but the courts blocked its opening. Federal prosecutors filed a lawsuit alleging the center was violating drug laws. The case reached the Supreme Court and became stuck in legal limbo. While politicians squabbled, people continued to die on the sidewalks. New Mayor Cherelle Parker, who took office in January 2024, promised to shut down the street drug market in Kensington once and for all. This promise had been made many times before, by different mayors, over different decades. But Parker acted more decisively than her predecessors. Cleanups began. Tent camps were torn down, people were evicted from sidewalks, personal belongings were bulldozed. The streets became cleaner, you can see it in photographs, but the people didn't go away, they moved a few blocks away. They settled in the entryways of apartment buildings. They occupied the porches and steps of other people's houses. Local residents began opening their front doors and finding strangers sleeping on their doorsteps. The city distributed over 100,000 doses of naloxone in 2023 alone, nearly doubling the previous year's figure. The number of doctors prescribing buprenorphine, a drug that reduces fentanyl cravings, has tripled since 2017, reaching 1,500. Over 10,000 opioid-dependent patients are treated in Philadelphia emergency rooms annually. According to preliminary data, overdose deaths fell to 1,045 in 2024. The first time in 3 years. And by August of 2025, the mortality rate indicated that the city could break the 1,000 annual death mark for the first time since 2016. Something might be working. But here's a fact that rarely makes headlines. The decline in mortality is unevenly distributed. Among whites, the decline is 15%. Among blacks, 5%. Among Hispanics, a 2% increase. The crisis isn't going away. It's changing color. It's shifting from one neighborhood to another, from one demographic group to another. Those with access to treatment and resources are surviving more often. Those without are dying at the same rate, or faster. 44% of Philadelphia residents personally know someone with an opioid addiction. 1 in 3 knows someone who died of an overdose. These aren't statistics from a distant catastrophe. These are neighbors, co-workers, children, parents, friends. And 51% of the city's residents now recognize addiction as a chronic condition, like diabetes or heart disease. In 2019, 39% thought so. Perceptions are changing, slowly, but they are changing. Here's the final tally. 1 street, 1 neighborhood, 1 city. Over 1,000 deaths a year. For nearly 10 years. Every day, new bodies. Every night, new doses. Every month, new impurities in the street drug, unknown to both buyers and often the sellers themselves. 260 street drug samples analyzed over a single year showed that the composition changes every few weeks. Fentanyl weakens. Xylazine retreats. Medetomidine advances. Industrial chemicals come and go. Not a single person buying a dose on Kensington Avenue knows exactly what they're injecting into their veins. Every injection is a lottery. And the prize in this lottery is either a few hours of oblivion or death. Kensington didn't happen overnight. It was built over decades. First, the factories left. Then the money left. Then the people left. Then the drugs came. Then heroin came. Then fentanyl. Then xylazine. Then medetomidine. Then industrial plastic stabilizer. Each layer is more terrifying than the last, and each layer comes faster. The interval between the emergence of a new threat and its mass spread has shrunk from decades to months. The system can't keep up. Not the medical, not the law enforcement, not the political. Kensington is not a story about drug addiction. It's not a story about weak people making bad choices. It's a story about emptiness, about what happens when everything disappears from a neighborhood: jobs, money, prospects, healthcare, education, hope, and only space remains. Bare, empty, abandoned space that is always filled with something. The only question is what? In Kensington, the answer to that question lies on the sidewalk, in used syringes, in bent bodies, in unhealed wounds, in 300 million views.